Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for joining me tonight. My name is Nechama Price. I am a proud Yoetzet of 5 communities within New Jersey. I was a graduate of the first Yoetzet class in America. I am the director of GPATS, the graduate program in Advanced Talmudic Studies, and I'm also a Tanakh professor at Stern College. So I'm excited tonight to share with you a Tanakh shir. During these 4 days of the Nishmat conference, we're dealing with all different types of relationships. So there's one type of relationship that we're going to be discussing tonight, which is known to be one that is quite difficult. It's known to be one that people make fun of. When I decided I was going to write a shir on the topic of in-laws, my son thought it would be funny to start telling me jokes about in-laws, and of course told the one joke that I didn't find funny, but maybe some of you do. What's the difference between an in-law and an outlaw? And the answer is outlaws are wanted. And that's mean a little bit, but I also started to wonder, why is it that we make jokes about the in-law relationship? What is it specifically about this relationship that makes it so difficult? We have many difficult relationships: the parent-child relationship, sibling rivalry, friendships. So what is it about the in-law relationship that we make so many jokes about it? So tonight, instead of looking into the research and the psychology, I like to do what I always do, which is look to relationships in the stories of Tanakh. Try to see if I can gain perspective about the in-law relationship through the stories of Tanakh. How did our heroes in Tanakh deal with their in-laws? Did they also have complicated relationships, and how did they figure those out? I would like to share the screen with you now with my source sheet, and I believe there's a link below that you can download it if you would like to have the source sheet in front of you. What I'd like to do is to look very quickly at a few in-law relationships, some that are good, some that are bad, for us already to see that in Tanakh it's not clear-cut. There can be positive in-law relationships as well as negative ones. So I want to start with positive because it's always good to start with positive, and especially because Shavuos is coming. And therefore, let's start with a very quick discussion of Megillat Ruth. If you look at source number 1, the relationship between Ruth and Naomi, her mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, is emphasized, the in-law relationship. If you look in just the few psukim that I gave you here in source 1, you see the fact that Ruth is Kalata, the daughter-in-law, and Naomi is Chamota, the mother-in-law, is emphasized over and over again. We call her Kalata, we call her again Kalata, we call her again Chamota. Over and over, instead of saying their names, we just say mother-in-law and we say daughter-in-law. And if you look at their relationship, it's really, to some extent, really beautiful. I mean, after, of course, Naomi loses her husband and her 2 sons, Ruth does not want to leave her side. She wants to stay. She wants to help. She wants to be part of Naomi's life. We know she goes and picks food off the ground, in order to support them, in order to feed them. At the end of the story, of course, she even gives over her child. But there's a pasuk here that I think is the dream of every in-law, where the pasuk tells us, that Ruth does everything that her mother-in-law told her to do, right? It's obviously a dream relationship. And of course, at the end, when she gives over her child, the women of the tribe of Yehuda come to Naomi and say, this daughter-in-law of yours, it's so amazing that you love her so much, and she's better than 7 sons. And in Tanakh, telling any woman that she's better than a son, but 7 sons especially, is something that is really impressive. And here we see a beautiful story of a mother-in-law, daughter-in-law who clearly care about each other, who clearly go out of their way to help each other, and especially Ruth throughout the story, who gives up her life of Moab, whatever that life was, whether she was a princess or not. I mean, the pshat, she's just a woman from Moab, but she gives up that life to be a poor person begging for food off the ground in order to give to her mother-in-law. It's a beautiful relationship, and one that we see, of course, that would be very positive. But as we move along to the next relationship, you can certainly see this one in a much more negative light. Ironically, the relationship begins when they're not father-in-law and son-in-law. We're talking about Lavan and Yaakov, if you're looking at the source sheet, source number 3. When it starts, we're talking about uncle and nephew. And Yaakov is running away because Esav wants to kill him, and Lavan welcomes him into his home. It starts off really beautifully here in source number 3. Vayaretz lekraso, vaychabekvo, vaynasheklo, vayivdeu el beito. He runs towards him. Lavan runs towards Yaakov to greet him. He hugs him, he kisses him, he brings him into his home, and he says to him, stay, your flesh and blood, stay in my home. And everything seems to be going really well. He's living in Lavan's house until, of course, he works for 7 years for Lavan. He gets a job with Lavan until the day he's supposed to marry Rachel. And we all know the story that happens that day. He's supposed to marry Rachel, and instead, Lavan gives him Leah instead. And that's when the relationship, when they become father-in-law and son-in-law, it all goes sour. Yaakov yells at Lavan, Mazot asita li, what did you do to me? I asked for Rachel. Well, Lama rimitani, why did you trick me? And everything seems to go downhill from here. As we all know, he works another 7 years for Rachel, and as time goes on, the relationship gets worse and worse. At some point, source number 4, they have to live a 3-day distance from each other, and then as the time goes on, source number 5, Vayar Yaakov it's Pnei Lavan things are not going well anymore. Lavan doesn't look at him the same. They're having money issues. He doesn't think that they've been treating each other properly. He doesn't think Lavan paying him properly. Everything's going wrong in their relationship. And therefore, Yaakov is forced. Pasach Chaf Aleph, Vayivrachu v'kol hashalo, he runs away. He runs away to escape his father-in-law. It's a terrible reality, what happens at the end, from being, you're my flesh and blood, part of my family, to someone who has to run away. And of course, it doesn't end there, because Lavan finds out that Yaakov has run away. I'm in source 5, and he goes, Vayirdof acharav, he chases after him. Rashi in source number 6 tells us, why is he chasing him? Lavan bikesh lakor et hakol kisher radaf achar Yaakov. Famously, as we know from the Haggadah, he was trying to chase him down. He was trying to kill him. He wanted to destroy everything, Rashi says. Where does this idea come from? It comes from the fact that when Lavan runs away, I'm still in source 6, Vayavo Elokim Lavan harami b'chalom laila. God comes to Lavan in a dream at night and says to him, be careful, don't do anything bad to Yaakov. So clearly, as Rashi says, his intention was to do something bad to Yaakov, possibly even to murder his own son-in-law. How terrible is that? However, one could also argue he was just chasing him down to make him come back, to make him return. You can't leave, you can't take my daughters, you can't take all my stuff. But the very end of the story, they depart from each other. Source number 7, after they have their whole discussion, they actually do make a covenant. He then, Lavan, goes and kisses his sons and his daughters goodbye, and Vayashav lakonim kamo, and Lavan goes home. The end of the story is Yaakov and Lavan go their separate ways. They do not harm each other, but they never see each other again. So here we see a much more negative view of the relationship of the son-in-law and the father-in-law. But the ultimate worst one that we have in Tanakh is, of course, the story of Shaul and David. When it comes to Shaul and David, once again, before they are actually related to each other, they have a beautiful relationship. David ends up in the house of Shaul. He plays music for him when he has bad moods, to the extent, Vayavehu ma'od, Shaul loves David. They have a beautiful relationship. He's his nosei kelim, he's his armor bearer, he's his right-hand man. He helps Shaul out all the time. They have a beautiful relationship, of course, until source number 9, after David kills Goliath and then ends up marrying into the family, marries Shaul's daughter Michal. He's now the son-in-law, and everything seems to go wrong. Pasuk Yud Aleph here in source 9, Shaul twice takes a spear and throws it at David, trying to murder his own son-in-law. And then the psukim go on, Pasuk Chavtet, it's horrible. Shaul oyev etz David kol hayamim. Shaul is David's enemy for all of his days. And there are so many psukim I could have given you when he tries to murder him countless times, but I gave you one more here where Shaul even tells other people, like Yonatan, his son, and all of his servant, lahamit at David. His goal is to kill David. So this is obviously the worst ending to a relationship between a father-in-law and a son-in-law. I think to some extent, any of us who have issues with our own in-laws can say to ourselves, okay, it's not that bad. It's not like David and Shaul. We can certainly feel better about that. But of course, that is something that goes to the extreme. There was a power, rivalry between them. Shaul thought David was going to be taking the Maluch away from him, which of course he was, and that ended up turning into a violent situation of a father-in-law wanting to kill his own son-in-law. So therefore, I really want to move forward to the last relationship that we're going to spend today on, and of course Shavuos, where we deal so much with Moshe, I thought it would be appropriate to talk about the in-law relationship between Moshe and his own father-in-law, that of Yitro, because this one's more complicated. When you look at the Ruth story, it's like, oh, that's a very positive one. You look at Lavan and you look at Shaul and David, and you're like, okay, that's a really negative one. Yitro and Moshe is kind of complicated. We're not really sure. Is it a positive relationship? Is it a negative relationship? And again, what is it that we can learn from the in-law relationship? So I wanted to show you how through learning the story of Moshe and Yitro, you could look at them from two completely different perspectives. You could look at their relationship as very positive, or you could look at their relationship as very negative. And I want to play out both of those versions for you tonight. There are two different stories that we have of the relationship and Moshe and Yitro. And that's, of course, in Shemot Perek Bet, which is when they meet each other, when Moshe marries Sipporah and becomes the son-in-law of Yitro. And then, of course, later in Shemot Yudchet, Parshat Yitro, where there's the reunion between Moshe and Yitro. Yitro comes to Moshe in the Midbar to come, see all the amazing things that Moshe is doing. Those are the two stories that we have of them. And I want to show you how we can really look at them from these two very different perspectives and see what from there we can learn. So if I want to start with positive, it's always nice to start with positive. So let's start from the very beginning. We all know the story. Moshe is running away from Paro. Paro wants to kill him because he killed a Mitzri, and he encounters a group of women at a well. They're being tormented by a group of shepherds, and he goes and he saves them. They run home to their father, source number 10, and their father is the one to instigate the relationship, and he yells at his daughters, Lama ze'azavtem es ha'ish? Karenu lo v'yachalechem. Why did you leave him there, right? Possible shidduch. What's your problem? Why'd you leave him there? Go get him. Let's bring him home. Let's have a meal with him. And of course, that meal becomes something much more. Pasuk Chaf Aleph, Vayoel Moshe lashevet et ha'ish. He remains with the man. He stays there. It's not just for a meal. He moves in. He starts to live with the man, meaning with Yitro. And of course, it turns into a marriage because at some point, Yitro gives over to Moshe, Tzipporah, his daughter, for Moshe to marry. But it's not just that he becomes part of the family. He's also given a job. We see in the next parak, Moshe Yaroet Son Chotzno, he gets the job of being the shepherd of his father-in-law's sheep. So if I look at it from this perspective, and if I look at source number 11, my chart, it starts off really seemingly very, very positive. We have a similarity between the Lavan Yaakov story and the Moshe Yitro story. We have a man who's running away, Yaakov who's running away from Esav who wants to kill him, Moshe who's running away from Paro who wants to kill him. He gets invited into a person's house, so Yaakov is invited in by Lavan, Moshe is invited in by Yitro. They both are allowed to stay. They're both invited to live there for a long period of time. They're both given a job of being a shepherd, and they're both given over a daughter or two daughters to marry to become part of the family. It's really seemingly, to some extent, a very beautiful relationship in the beginning. And also, if I look at the psukim, it really does sound like Moshe's relationship is with Yitro. Vayoel Moshe lashevet et ha'ish. Yitro chooses which daughter to give to Moshe. It's not that he wants to marry Sipporah necessarily. He wants to stay within the family of Yitro. He wants to stay. He likes Yitro. And therefore, Yitro says, fine, you can marry one of my daughters, and gives him a daughter to marry. It seems very clear that the relationship of Moshe and why he's there is really about Yitro, because if you look at source number 12, when Moshe wants to leave, he has to ask Yitro for permission. Vayelech Moshe vayashav al Yetzer chotzno vayomer lo elchana v'ashuv alachai yashar Mitzrayim. Can I go back to Mitzrayim? Can I go back to my family? He needs to ask permission from Yitro because the entire relationship is really about Moshe and Yitro. He got invited in by Yitro, so he has to ask to leave by Yitro. And therefore, you might ask, what was it about Yitro? Moshe seems to be so happy with his father-in-law and want to be part of his father-in-law's family. What was it about Yitro? So, of course, you could say he's the first person to invite him in, and he really liked him. I mean, he was a really nice person that he invited Moshe in. He wasn't related to him. It's not like Lavan. So therefore, it was really kind of him. You can also say, based on the fact that Yitro is known as the Kohen Midyan, it says it more than once in the Psukim, to tell us he's a man of prestige, a man of power. Moshe is running away from the palace, but grew up in a house of power, is therefore attracted to somebody with similar qualities. Or third, maybe Moshe and Yitro had a lot in common. If you look at source 13, Rashi, Ibn Ezra both both point out that something special about Yitro. You know, in Midian, it's a totally different place and totally different beliefs and totally different culture. But he found the one guy that Rashi said, Piresh lo me'avodah zarah, who left avodah zarah, or Ibn Ezra, Yitro haya kohen laHashem. He was a kohen laHashem. He found someone who had common beliefs to him, and therefore that's the man that he wanted to be part of his family. And therefore we start Shemot Parak Bet with a beautiful story of Moshe finding someone that he really has a lot in common with, which is, of course, Yitro. And therefore, based on that, he wants to be part of Yitro's family, marries one of his daughters. It's a beautiful story. And therefore, fast forward now, at some point, Moshe leaves to go down to Mitzrayim. He sends back his family. That's not the point of the shir today. That's a different shir of itself as to why he sends Tzipporah and his two sons back to Yitro. But at some point, fast forward, Shemot Yitchet, and now he reunites with Yitro. And if we are looking at this from the positive perspective, we can clearly see it in the Psukim, source 14. Everything is about Yitro. Vayishma Yitro, Vayikach Yitro, Vayavo Yitro. Everything is Yitro. He hears all the amazing things that's going on with his son-in-law. He takes his daughter and her children. He comes to Moshe, right? Everything is about Yitro. And look how many times in the Psukim, 3 times just in these 2 Psukim, that 3 Psukim that I gave you, Chotein Moshe, Chotein Moshe, Chotein Moshe. There's an emphasis. This is the father-in-law. This is the beautiful relationship of Moshe and his father-in-law. And we see that it is two-sided. Pasuk Zayin, Vayetze Moshe lekrach chot. Now Moshe's excited. His father-in-law is here. He's so excited. Again, doesn't call him Yitro, calls him the father-in-law. That's the beautiful relationship they have. Vayishtachu, Vayishaklo, he bows, he kisses him, Vayishalu ish l'rehu, and they're asking each other, how are you doing? They're so excited. He brings them inside his home. Pasochet, Vayisaper Moshe l'chutz noetz kol asher aseh Hashem. Tells him stories upon stories. He's so excited to see his father-in-law. He tells him everything that's occurred to him since the last time they saw each other. To the extent that the Yalkut Shimoni points out, learn from Moshe how to treat your in-laws. Mikana Moshe Adam Muchan lekavod chamav. You see, you should always be ready to give honor to your father-in-law. Look at Moshe, who didn't know he was coming, but here we go, how beautifully he reacts to his father-in-law coming down to where Moshe was. Source 15, it continues the story. Vayikach Yitro chotein Moshe, olah uzvachim la'alokim, vayivo Aaron v'kol ziknei Yisrael la'achol lechem im chotein Moshe lifnei alokim. It's beautiful. He takes his father-in-law, they give karbanos together. He invites his family, he invites all his friends, Aaron and all the Zakanim. Come, meet my father-in-law. I'm so excited for you to meet my father-in-law. Moshe loves his father-in-law and wants everyone to meet him. But that's not enough. Pasuk Yud Gimel, the next day he says, come with me to work, right? Take your father-in-law to work day. He's so excited. He brings his father-in-law to work with him. And here's where the story takes an interesting twist. Pasuk Yud Daled, Vayavo chotein Moshe kol asher hu asa la'am. He sees what his son-in-law is doing. He sees what he's doing. It's such a huge deal. And what does he see? Ma hadavar hazeh asher ata oseh la'am, madua ata yoshev levadecha. You know, everybody looks at what Moshe's doing and says, well, Moshe's doing what's good for the people. But Yitro's coming from a different perspective. I don't care about the people. I'm not connected to the people. Who do I care about? I care about my son-in-law. Why are you sitting here by yourself? Why are you working so hard? Says Yitro, the Chotein Moshe, the father-in-law of Moshe, who cares about his son-in-law. Lo tova davar asher ata, that's not good what you're doing. Listen to me, I have a great idea. What's my idea? My idea is v'hakel me'alecha v'nasu itach. Get other people to help you so it'll be easier for you. All Yitro wanted to do was to make Moshe's life easier. This is too hard. This is not fair, Moshe, what you're doing to yourself. Yitro was coming out of the perspective of loving his son-in-law and seeing that his son-in-law is working too hard and wants to make his life easier. Within this positive perspective of their relationship, we're going to continue to say again, it was mutual. So Moshe listens to everything his father-in-law says. He says, you're right. I didn't think about it before. And therefore, what does he do? Everything Yitro tells him to do. If you look at source 16, I gave you a chart. And on the chart, you see on the one hand, in one column, everything Yitro said. And then in the other column, everything Moshe did. And it matches up perfectly, almost word for word. Yitro tells him specifically which type of people to find. Anshe Chayil. And Moshe goes and he finds Anshe Chayil. He says, appoint them to be officers. Sarei Elofim, Sarei Meot, Sarei Chamishim. It's exactly what Moshe does. He says, what should their job do? They should judge the people all the time. That's exactly what Moshe does. And then he says, here's your job. When it's something big, they'll come to you. But when it's something small, let them take care of it. And that's exactly what the Pasuk writes again, what Moshe does. And if it wasn't clear enough to us just by looking at the Psukim, source 17, the Pasuk tells us, Vayishma Moshe lekol chotno vayas kol asher amar. Moshe listened to the voice of his father-in-law, again, always referring to Yitro as the father-in-law, showing the relationship. He did everything he said. It reminds us, of course, of the pasuk I read you a few minutes ago of Ruth and Naomi, how Ruth listened to everything that Naomi said. Here, Moshe doing the exact same thing. And therefore, it's beautiful. We have this beautiful, mutual, respectful relationship. Yitro, who loves his son-in-law, wants to come see what's going on with him, gives him advice that's best for him. Moshe, who reacts by taking it seriously, listening to him, and of course, respecting him so much that he does exactly what his son-in-law says. The story ends, Vayishalach Moshe chotno vayelech lo al artzo, that their reunion ends. Moshe sends his father-in-law home, again referring to him as the father-in-law, and he goes home. The language Vayishalach Moshe is a little surprising. He sends him? Why would he be sending him? Doesn't he want him to stay? Why is he sending him? Comes the Mefarshim, starting here with the Midrash, the Mechilta. No, it's how much respect he had for Yitro, which is what's being told to us here in this pasuk, source 18. What's Vayishalach? Shalchu b'kvodo shel olam v'natan lo matano rabo. He sent him with the honor of the world, meaning he gave him presents. He sent him with stuff. Don't go home empty-handed. Of course you can. You're my father-in-law. I'm going to give you presents. Or Ibn Ezra, Vayishlach derek kavod. Again, it's out of honor he sent him, but differently, not with presents, but rather with himself, meaning kamo v'avram holechim am l'shalcham. He walked with him part of a distance, right? It's something that's beautiful to do. When you have guests, you walk them out the door. You don't just say goodbye. You walk with them part of the way. And that's Ibn Ezra, how Moshe showed his father-in-law respect. The Dot Mikra I thought was interesting to parallel, just like Moshe, out of respect for his father-in-law, would not leave his father-in-law's house without his permission. So too Yitro, out of respect for Moshe, would not leave Moshe without Moshe's permission. Says the Dot Mikra, Natan lo reshut lalachem meimo. Moshe says, it's okay. You can leave. Hu min hagderech eretz. This is the way of respect. You don't leave the house of your host until you get permission. Just like Moshe got permission from Yitro, Yitro gets permission from Moshe. It's a beautiful relationship between Moshe and Yitro, based on respect, based on looking out for each other, based on love. And obviously that would be the key to a beautiful relationship between a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law and her mother-in-law or her father-in-law. But now let me do a little bit of a flip, because it is possible to read everything I just did in the total opposite way and show a negative relationship between Moshe and Yitro. If we start again from the very beginning, we have to remember that Moshe is running away. Moshe is running away, and unlike Yaakov, who was told by his mom, go to the house of Lavan, who knew exactly where, I apologize that my texts are showing up right now, who knew exactly where he was supposed to go, right? Moshe had no idea where he was supposed to go and who was going to take him in. So you could understand that when you are running away and you have nowhere to go, you're going to go to the first person who lets you into their home. It doesn't mean you like them. It doesn't mean you care for them. It just means now you have shelter. Now you have a place to live. And it is also very, very likely that when Moshe was running away, he wasn't really telling the truth about his story. Think about his story for a minute. What's his story? I'm running away because I killed an Egyptian, and now Paro wants to kill me. So could you please let me live within your home? If you think about it, if he told that story to just about anyone, I think they would kick him out immediately. First of all, why would you want a murderer living in your own home? Why would you want a fugitive living in your own home, knowing that Paro, the most powerful man in the entire world at that time, wanted to have him dead? Which would therefore mean that Paro might come chasing after him or send some servants after him, and then might kill you too for harboring the fugitive. So why would anyone want Moshe in their home? And therefore it is possible Moshe did not tell the truth. And we have hints to that within the Psukim, because when the daughters of Yitro come to Yitro to say that they met this guy at the well, they say, source 19, Ish Mitzri Hatzilani, an Egyptian man saved us. Now we know Moshe is not an Egyptian. So it is possible that he told them he was an Egyptian. He looked like an Egyptian, but it is possible he led them to believe that. The Medrash in Dvarim Rabbah picks up on this idea that it wasn't just that's what they thought, but it's that Moshe made them believe this by critiquing Moshe in the following midrash. Amar Rav Levi, Amar Lefanav Ribono Shel Olam. So I'm in source 19, okay? So Rav Levi gives the following story. Moshe says to Hashem, Atzmotav shel Yosef nichnasu la'aretz v'ani enu nichnas la'aretz. We all know Moshe was given the job to get the bones of Yosef out of Mitzrayim, to bring them into Eretz Yisrael, because Yosef made everybody promise that that would be so on his deathbed at the very end of Breshit. So Moshe turns to Hashem and says, wait a minute, Yosef's bones gets to go into Eretz Yisrael, but I don't get to go into Eretz Yisrael? Right at the very end, we're in Devarim Rabbah. So in Devarim, when he knows he's not going in, he says, wait, that's not fair. How come Yosef gets to go in and I don't? Amar lo Kadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem says back to him, Misha hoda ba'artzo nikvar ba'artzo. Anyone who admits to be associated to the land of Israel gets to be buried here. Misha lo hoda ba'artzo einu nikvar ba'artzo. And anyone who doesn't admit to being associated with the land cannot be buried here. Goes on the Midrash to tell us Yosef, of course, admitted to being part of the land. Ganov ganavti meretz ha'ivrim. But you, Moshe, lo hodita ba'artzacha. You did not admit to being associated to your land, and therefore you cannot be buried here. So the Medrash wants to know, Ketzad, when's the story that Moshe denied his association to the Jewish people or to the land of Israel? And the story is this one. Benot Yitro omrot, ish mitzri hatzilani miyad haroim, v'hu shomea v'shotek. The daughters of Yitro said, oh, he's Egyptian. And he heard and he was quiet. Lefichach lo nikvar ba'artzo, and therefore he lost the right to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. According to this view, they're saying that at least in the beginning of the story, Moshe doesn't tell them anything. He doesn't tell them who he is, which makes so much logical sense. Why would he? Why would they let him stay if he does? And it's possible to argue he never tells them the truth. Until the sneh happens, he thinks his identity is completely hidden. And then, of course, God says it's time to go back to Mitzrayim, and he's got a problem now because they don't know anything about his story. And that would explain why in source number 20, a pasuk I referred to before, when Moshe is asking Yitro if he could please go back to Mitzrayim, he really talks very ambiguously. He doesn't really tell him the truth at all. He kind of lies. He says to Yitro, Elcha na v'shuva l'chai asher b'Mitzrayim. Can I please go and return to my brothers that are in Mitzrayim? I want to see if they're still alive. See how ambiguous he is. First of all, he doesn't identify his brothers. It's very possible Yitro thinks he's talking about the Mitzrayim, which he always thought he was a Mitzri. But of course, he's talking about the Jewish people that he now knows are his brothers, but he's not identifying them because he needs to keep up his secret. He also doesn't say, the God of Israel appeared to me and told me I'm about to be the leader to take the Jewish people out. Can I just go back and see if they're alive? So ambiguous. It's him at least almost saying to his father-in-law, I'm just going to do a visit, see my family, I'm going to come right back, which of course we know is not going to happen. And therefore it's possible he had to lie to Yitro to leave Yitro's home because he had never actually told Yitro the truth. His relationship with Yitro was full of lies, full of distrust, because he never trusted Yitro to know his true identity. The second possibility is he did tell the truth. But if you look at the Midrash, either it's saying this happened, which of course we never know if these stories happen, or if the Midrash is giving us a portrayal of what would have happened had he told Yitro the truth. Look at this in source 21. Moshe runs to Midian because he can't go back to Mitzrayim because Paro wants to kill him. He gets to Yitro, and he tells him the story. In this Midrash, he tells him the truth. I killed a Mitzri, Paro wants to kill me. And here's the reaction of Yitro. Exactly what we would have expected. He hears this and says, I'm throwing this guy in jail. I'm not letting him live in my house. So what does he do? He literally throws him in jail. 10 years, Moshe is in jail, right? His future father-in-law has thrown him in jail for 10 years. So how does he live? During that time, she feeds him. Sipporah fills bath for him and feeds him, which means Yitro is starving him to death. That's what Yitro is doing to him. He's not even feeding him. The story goes on. 10 years go by, and she says to his dad, should we go check on that that Jewish guy in jail. And her father says, that's ridiculous. I haven't fed him in 10 years. How could he be alive? So Zipporah says, oh, he has this really cool God who saved Abraham. Maybe he's still alive. Of course, not admitting, she's lying to her father, that she's been feeding him. So he says, okay, let's go check. He says, fine, this sounds like a great idea. Let's do it. Like his daughter said. He goes to the pit, reminding us of Yosef. What happened to Moshe? Reminding us of the story of Daniel. He's standing there, he's davening to Hashem. So at that point, he takes him out of the pit. He shaves him. It's big day. He gives him food, he gives him normal clothes. And at that point, he's like, okay, this guy is a man of God. So he lets him marry his daughter Tzipporah. But that's how the relationship begins. Out of complete distrust and really a terrible beginning. He throws him in jail and starves him for 10 years. And even at that point, he fully doesn't understand Moshe. He doesn't believe in Moshe's beliefs because according to this midrash, he even tells Moshe he cannot give a bris milah to his oldest son. He does not believe in the values of Moshe. And therefore, if you start the story this way, the story is very, very different. This is a story of lack of respect, lack of trust between Moshe and Yitro. Either, again, Moshe doesn't tell him anything, or Moshe does tell him, but therefore he does not like him for it and doesn't treat him nicely for it. Within the Pshat of the Psukim, you can see it as well. He makes him the shepherd. The shepherd is the dirty job normally in Tanakh. Lavan gives it to Yaakov. Yishai gives it to David. It's the dirty job. It's the job nobody else wants to do. Not only that, if I go back to the pasuk, Vayoel Moshe lashevet et ha'ish, the language of Vayoel was very strange. If you look at source 22, the Medrash says the language of Vayoel is a language of Shavua. It's a language of swearing. He made Moshe swear that he would never leave. Look at this midrash with me. It's fascinating, paralleling it to the story of Yaakov and Lavan as we keep doing that son-in-law, father-in-law relationship as well. Vayoel Moshe nishpalo. He said, you have to swear. Lamashbia. Why does he make him swear? Amarlo. Lavan says to Moshe, Yodea anisha Yaakov avichem kishenatan lo Lavan et benotav natzlan v'halach lo chutz midato. You know what? I know the story of this other family relationship, father-in-law, son-in-law. Yaakov tricked Lavan. As soon as he married his daughters, he took off and he left. If I let you marry my daughter, you're going to do the same thing. So he said, you have to swear you will never leave. And only then was he allowed to marry Tzipporah. And only then he gave him a job to shepherd his sheep. We therefore see this is a negative relationship. He was never allowed to leave, which is why when he then lies to his father-in-law and says, oh, I'll be back soon, I'm just going to Mitzrayim, that was his way to escape. That was a lie. That was a way to get out of the swear that he made. And therefore, he was also running away from his father-in-law. Just like Yaakov in source 23, Vayivrachu runs away from Lavan. Just like David numerous times, and this is the story where Shaul was really coming to kill David. And Michal, his own wife, which was the daughter of Shaul, lets him out the window. Vayelach Vayivrach he escapes and he runs away from his own father-in-law. So we have a similar storyline now, the negative storyline of Moshe who escapes from his father-in-law, the father-in-law that he did not have respect for, the father-in-law that he lied to all those years or certainly didn't see eye to eye to at all. And therefore now I have to look at the reunion in a very, very different way. Fast forward to Shemot Yudchet, and now all of a sudden I see something I didn't see before. When they reunite, I remind you, Moshe never calls them. Yitro hears, Yitro comes. Moshe doesn't call. He doesn't seem to want Yitro to come. It's about to be Matan Torah. You'd think if he loved his father-in-law so much, he'd want him there. He'd want him to witness Matan Torah. Moshe doesn't call. He just shows up. And when he shows up, look at the language one more time. Vayetze Moshe lekrat chotzno, vayishtachu. Vayishaklo. These words are in singular. If you look at the Midrash, it's only one person. We don't know who's bowing to who. We don't know who's kissing who. It is very possible it is Yitro who is bowing. It is Yitro who is kissing. And all Moshe does is say, hey, what's going on? Why are you here? But it's not that he's greeting him the way that we thought he was greeting him before. And therefore, maybe he's like, okay, come meet all my friends and come see everything so I can get rid of you really quickly. You came to check out what was going on in my life. So here, meet all my friends. Here, meet Aaron. Meet the Zakanim. Come to work with me because I just want you to go home. I do not want you to stay. And then, of course, what happens is something Moshe never expected. Yitro starts to give him criticism. Yitro starts to give him advice. And he says to him, I don't think what you're doing is good. I think you should be doing something else. So what do I do with the fact that in the Psukim, it sounds like Moshe listens to Yitro? That would sound like a relationship of respect, as we discussed before. Well, here's the issue. If Moshe really listened to Yitro, then I don't understand the following story that happens in the second year in the desert. In source 25, Moshe turns to Hashem and says, Lo uchal anochi levadi laseit et kol ha'am hazeh. I can't do this all by myself. The people are too great for me. And God tells Moshe to get 70 people of the Zakanim to help him. And I'm curious, isn't that what Yitro told him to do in Shemo Parak Yochet? Isn't that what we said Moshe did in Shemo Parak Yochet, which is the first year in the desert? So why is he alone in the second year of the desert? So either what happened is Moshe just again wanted to get rid of his father-in-law. So his father-in-law said, do this, do this, do this. He's like, sure. Okay, I'm doing it. Look, I'm doing it. Here, you two. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's 70. Come, you. Oh, they're chosen. Here you go. Okay, bye, Yitro, bye. Okay, you can all go home, right? Or he never actually does what Yitro said at all. If you look at the Malbim, which I gave you here in source 26, and then afterwards the Abar Benel that I gave you in source 27, they really have this idea. Moshe did not listen to Yitro at the time that Yitro said it because he couldn't. There was no Torah yet. Parshas Mishpatim wasn't given over. How could he have 70 people judging the nation? They didn't know how to judge them yet. It's silly. You can't have 70 people judging the nation when only Moshe spoke to God and only Moshe knew the rules. It doesn't make any sense. Says the Malbim in a really fascinating way. Look where I bolded. Shelo bachar shoftim tekef. Rak b'shana shniyah kisharatzu lisamim bidbar sinai l'Eretz Yisrael. He doesn't do it now. He doesn't pick the 70 people now. He does it later in the second year because God tells him to. Where do we see it hinted to in the language? He says so cleverly, Sheyesh havdel ben shmiya bikol uben shmiya likol. I think we can all relate to this, and certainly in terms of our children. There's a difference between listening bikol and listening likol. What's the difference? Shmiya bikol maresha kibal dvarav. If someone's listening to your voice, bikol, it means they hear you and they listen to you and they do exactly what you say. Shmiya likol maresha sam level dvarav shakalu tam b'paspech shechlo. I'm thinking about it. I'm not doing it, right? If you look here, right? He's like, I'm listening, Yitro, but I can't do it. It doesn't make any sense. He actually rejected what Yitro said. And the language of he did everything that Yitro said really was referring to much later when God commands him to do it. And this is exactly the thesis of the Abar Benel as well, which is he listened to Yitro and said, that doesn't make any sense. And when he does it later, it's because God told him to do it and not because Yitro told him to do it. And therefore, this is a very different relationship between Moshe and Yitro, which of course concludes at the end of the parak, source 28. Vayishalach Moshe tzchotno, he sends his father-in-law away. Instead of having to say it's with honor, I can just translate it literally. When you send someone away, it's like you're pushing them out the door. You're like, please go, please leave. I gave you a number of psukim where you see that language referring to that type of experience. Vayishalach et hayonah, we're referring to Noach, right? He wants to know, is it dry outside? So he throws the dove outside the teva. He says, go see if there's dry land. Vayishalach, he sends it out. Or of course, in the story of Lot, who is avoiding the destruction of Sodom, Vayishalach et Lot mitoch hafecha. God throws Lot out from amongst the chaos so that Lot is able to survive. Or Vayishlach Yitzchak et Yaakov. This is when, of course, Yaakov just stole the bracha, and Yaakov is going to get killed by Esav if he doesn't leave quickly. So Yitzchak sends Yaakov away. Go to Lavan's house. Get out of here so that you can survive. And of course, we say to Paro, Vayishalach et bnei Yisrael me'artzo. Please, let's send the Jewish people out of your land. It's a language of kicking somebody out. And therefore, Moshe was literally showing Yitro the door, throwing him out. And therefore, when we conclude these two different stories, one in Shemot Bet, one in Shemot Parak Yudchet, we have two very different versions of the father-in-law, son-in-law relationship. Either it's good, and when it's good, it's based on mutual respect, it's based on trust, it's based on looking out for what's good for the other person, all amazing qualities to have when you want to have a good relationship. If it's bad, then it's because it's about secrecy and building walls and a lack of trust and a lack of respect and really just closing somebody off to who you really are. And that, of course, would create a very negative relationship, having different values, not seeing things eye to eye at all. And therefore, we're left kind of questioning which is the relationship that Moshe has with Yitro. But I want to add to the puzzle another piece, because there is probably, or possibly, I should say, another story of an encounter between Yitro and Moshe. And that's here in Bamidbar Parak Yud, source 29. There is a really weird story in Bamidbar Yud, Pasuk Chav 10. Vayomer Moshe lechovav ben Reuel hamidjani chotein Moshe. Moshe says to a man by the name of Chovav, the son of Reuel, who's from Midian, who is the father-in-law of Moshe. And he says, we're going to a place that God said he would give to you. Come with us. It'll be good for you. Because God says he's going to do good for the Jewish people. And this person, whoever he is, no, I will not go. I'm going to go back to my land, back to my birthplace. And Moshe insists, no, please stay. It would be good for you. It'll be good for us. And then there's one more pasuk where he tries to tell him to stay, and then the story ends. And it's one of the weirdest stories because you're left on a cliffhanger. Does he come? Does he stay? Does he go? We don't know, because the reaction of this person is not written in the psukim. Just Moshe saying, please come, please come. The other weird part of the story is we don't know who this person is. Chovav ben Reuel, the Midjani, who's the father-in-law of Moshe. And I'll tell you why we don't know who this is. Because if you look at source 30 with me, Reuel, we assumed in the story in Shemot Parak Bet that we just referred to before, where the girls come back from the well and say, oh, we met this Mitzri guy who saved us. Yitro there seems to be called Reuel Avihem, their father Reuel. So if Reuel is Yitro, then Chovav, the son of Reuel, would not be Yitro. It would be his son, a new person by the name of Chovav. However, on the other hand, if you look at this pasuk in Shoftim, it tells us that there are some people that are the children of Chovav, who is the Chotein Moshe, the father-in-law of Moshe. Therefore, Chovav would be Reuel, would be Yitro, I apologize. So therefore, the question here is, who is this guy? Is it Yitro, or is it a son of Yitro that we've just never heard of before? And the Mefarshim take both sides. I want to play it out for both sides. If you look at Rashi, source 31, he believes this person in the story that Moshe is saying, please stay, is Yitro. He has many names, and this is based on the Medrash, which I gave you in source 32. Shiva Shemos Nikru Ulo, he had 7 names, Yeter, Yitro, Reuel, Chovav, Chever, Kini, and Putiel. Why does he have so many names? Well, Rashi at least explains the name of Chovav, Chavav et Torah, because he loved the Torah. Or Ramban in source 33, I like his explanation, which is that at some point Yitro converts, and when somebody converts, they change their name. So when he changed his name to Chovav because he loved the Torah, and when he shav the Torah Yisrael, he got a new name when he returned to the Jewish people, when he converted, and that's why now he's called Chovav. Okay, very nice. So if this is the story of Yitro, then we just have to kind of tune a few details, which is therefore the Rashbam writes, if that's true, then when the girls were running back from the well, they actually weren't talking to their father Yitro, they were talking to Reuel Avi Avihem, their grandfather. Why does the pasuk call it their father? Well, we can answer. Sometimes father, grandfather gets interchanged. And I gave you one example. Yaakov, who says, Elokei Avi Avraham, the God of my father Avraham, and we all know Avraham is his grandfather. So therefore, okay, I can easily say they went back to their grandfather. There was the grandfather that's involved in the story. But this story of Moshe saying, please stay, Chovav ben Reuel, is therefore referring to Yitro. Well, if this is true, I have a much bigger problem, because I just finished telling you the story of Shemot Yechet. And at the end of Shemot Yechet, Yitro goes home. So if he goes home in Shemot Yechet, how is he back in Bamidbar Yud? I mean, didn't he leave? How is he here? So there's 2 ways to understand it. Rashi says when he went home at the end of Shemot Yechet, it was temporary. It was just for a short while. L'gayer b'nei mishpachto, to convert the rest of his family and bring his whole family back with him. Proof to Rashi is I gave you 3 sources, 2 in Shoftim, 1 in Shmuel, where we see that there are relatives or descendants, I should say, of Yitro that live amongst the Jewish people. And therefore we could argue he went home. First he came just him and Zipporah and the 2 sons. And then he went back home to kind of bring back the whole mishpacha, the whole family. And therefore at the end of Shemot Yechet, he goes to home for a short period of time, gathers the whole family, and then returns. And now in Bamidbar Yud, he's almost going to leave again. And Moshe is saying, please stay, please stay. That's one version to this story, that Moshe is begging him to stay. The second version of the story is to say, no, all of these stories are really one story, meaning this is Yitro, and Yitro leaves, but he only leaves once. And therefore, he comes in the beginning of Shemot Perek Yochet. He comes in the beginning, then he wants to leave, and somehow now we flip to Bamidbar Yud, where Moshe is like, please stay, please stay. And then the end of Shemot Yochet tells us the truth. He chooses to leave. He does not choose to stay. So it's not a cliffhanger. We know that he leaves at the end. The question that the Mefarshim argue, because this is the view of most Mefarshim, that this is Yitro and he really just chooses to leave, and we know that from the end of Perek Yechad of Shemot. The question that they ask is, so when did the story take place? Did it take place before Matan Torah, which is Shemot Yechet, or did the story take place after Matan Torah, which is Bamidbar Yud, and for some reason written in Shemot Yechet? And that's where they divide. So just if you would like to know, those who hold this before Matan Torah is the Ramban and Shadal. Those who hold the whole thing happened after Matan Torah is the Ibn Ezra, Radak, and the Rashbam, and we just hear about Yitro and Perek Yechet to kind of connect him to Perek Yud Zayin, which was about Amalek. So it's like the bad people from other nations and the good people from other nations. So we kind of put Yitro right next to them, but really he came after Matan Torah in the location Bamidbar Yud. And then there are those like Abar ben Alma ben Rabag who say he comes before Matan Torah, stays for a year plus, and then leaves after Matan Torah in Bamidbar Yud. But what they're all saying is the same picture. He comes, Moshe begs him, please don't go, please don't go. But the end of the story is that he goes. Well, what do I do with the fact that his descendants still seem to be with us later on in Sefer Shoftim and Sefer Shmuel? Source 36, the Sfarno. Aval b'nei Yitro halchu im Yisrael la'aretz b'li safek. He leaves behind his family. He goes home, but that doesn't mean that he takes everybody with him. The Nitziv also. Hu halach levado l'artzo. He goes home alone, but the rest of the family stays. So there's one version of the story with this is Yitro, and Moshe's begging him to stay. Either we don't know if he stays or he goes, that's Rashi's version, or the version of all these other Mefarshim, which he chooses to leave. Put that on hold for a second. Second possibility is this guy Chovav is not Yitro. Reuel is Yitro, as we thought so when we were reading the Psukim in Shemot Bet. This guy Chovav is a new character. He's the son of Yitro, which would make him the brother of Tzipora, who we've never met before. If you look in Ibn Ezra, that's exactly what Ibn Ezra says. Matzani shetzipora hibat Reuel. If Tzipora is the daughter of Reuel, as it says in the pasuk we read a minute ago, then Chovav hu ben Reuel, and Chovav is the son of Reuel. Well, let's put that together. He clearly is the brother of Tzipora. This is also brought down by Shadal. Chovav hu ben Yitro v'ach Tzipora. He's the son of Yitro and the brother of Tzipora. And therefore, what would we do with the understanding of Chatan Moshe, Chatan Moshe? You know what? Chatan in Tanakh doesn't always mean father-in-law. It means in-law. It can mean son-in-law. It can mean brother-in-law. It can mean father-in-law. And I gave you two examples here in source 38. When Lot is talking to his Chatan, he's talking to his son-in-laws. And when David says to Shaul, oh, you're going to let me marry your daughter, ki Chatan lemelech, I'm going to be the son-in-law of the king, we see here it means son-in-law. And therefore it could easily mean brother-in-law, and therefore there really is no issue to say Chovav is really the brother of Tzipora. Now, if that's true, okay, so then the story is Yitro comes, Yitro goes home. Beautiful. Chovav stays. And now Chovav is about to leave, and Moshe is saying, please, please stay. My question to you is, why do we care? Why is this found in the Torah? Why is this a story that we even hear about? But I'm going to make the question even bigger. Because if I look at the context of the story, it's like in a really significant place. Because we are in Bamidbar Yud. We just counted the Degalim. We just put ourselves in order of our encampment in order to travel. We're talking about the Anan that's going to lead us as we travel. We're blowing the Chatzot. And right after Moshe says, please stay, we have the Pasuk, Vayehi ben Soa Aaron. I mean, it's amazing. Kuma Hashem we're traveling. We're about to go into Eretz Yisrael until, of course, we start complaining and then it all goes wrong. But what I want to know is, why is this story found here? Why is the story of the brother or even of Yitro, Moshe saying, please come with us, found in such a pivotal moment of Jewish history? We're about to go into Eretz Yisrael, and what does it teach us about these relationships? So I want to take a step back and just say something very significant about Moshe. Moshe Moshe is different than most of us because Moshe actually has three families. Because here we're talking about a story. I don't know if it's father-in-law, I don't know if it's a brother-in-law, but it's a relative. That's what it's for sure. And it's a relative that he's saying, please stay. And if I'm thinking about Moshe's relatives, he's got something unique, as I just said. He's got three families. He's got his Jewish family, he's got his Egyptian family, and he's got his Midian family, which therefore means he has three father figures. I gave you here in source number 40 all the different times where it lets us know that Amram is Moshe's father. Now, we know he lived with Yocheved and Amram until he was weaned. We have nowhere in the Psukim that tells us of a relationship between Moshe and his father, but we certainly know that Amram was his Jewish father. On the other hand, when he was in Egypt, growing up with Bat Paro, it seems like Paro was assumed to be his father or grandfather figure. We have Midrashim of him sitting on Paro's lap, playing with his crown. Of course, that ends badly, source 41, when he kills an Egyptian and his father figure wants to kill him and he must run away from him. And then, of course, he has this third father figure, Yitro, that we've been spending the last 45 minutes talking about. But not only does he have three father figures, he seems to also, maybe we could argue, three brother figures, right? He has his Jewish brother, source 42, Aaron, right? Aaron, his brother, who comes to greet him as he's coming back to Mitzrayim. And of course, he has the second Paro, right after the Paro dies, we have Vayakam Melech Hadash, which possibly would be the Paro he grew up with, which would be more of his brother figure. And maybe we can argue this Chovav guy is his Midian brother, right? His brother-in-law, and therefore he has three brother figures. And now I want to present, if we're talking about three father figures, three brother figures, how this story plays out for us. Because either the person leaves or the person stays, right? He says, no, Siman Nachnu, we're going, can you stay? Either the person stays or leaves. He can't do both of those actions. So let's play it out in both those ways. Let's say the person leaves. He's either the father-in-law or the brother-in-law from Midian. What's the story? The story is, here's Moshe Rabbeinu. He had three families. He had to destroy one of those families, Egypt, in order to save the Jewish people. And now he's at a crossroad. He's about to travel. He's about to do it. We're going into Eretz Yisrael. And he has to say goodbye to his Midian family. He has to choose. God says to him, I am the God of Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov. This is your right family. This could be why he hesitates so much at the snare. How hard it is to leave behind his other two families. And therefore, this is what he has to do. Leave that person behind. Where do I see it in the language when he says, come with me? Source 44, what does the person respond? Lo elech. What does that remind me? I will not go. I'm going back to my land. I'm going back to my birthplace. It's the opposite of Avraham. Leave your land. Leave your birthplace. It's the opposite of Rivka, who says, Elech, I will go. I will leave my family and join the Jewish people. This person saying, no, I will not leave them behind. I will not change my ways. Moshe is saying, come with me, but come with me if you can take on my values. Come with me if you want to be part of my new nation. And they are refusing him, and they are saying no to him. And this, I apologize, but you have it here in source 47. Shadal is saying from this language of lo elech, amoladete elech, it's clear they're rejecting us. They're rejecting the Jewish people in that language. And therefore, what Moshe has to do here is choose the right father. He's got to choose Amram, who's known as the Gadol Hador, or the Rosh Sanhedrin. So he's refusing Yitro, and Yitro's leaving Yitro behind, or he's leaving behind the brother-in-law, and he's choosing Aaron. Aaron, the one, source 46, I gave a whole bunch of psukim, him and Aaron who face Paro together, him and Aaron who do what God tells him to do throughout the entire time that they are together in the Midbar and in Mitzrayim, and of course Aaron who's chosen to be the Kohen Gadol. He has to choose the right family. This is that moment right before no Siman Nachnu, we're going in. Moshe has to turn and say, come, will you take on my values? Will you be part? Because if not, I'm leaving you behind. And he leaves behind his Midian family. Or there's a second way to look at it. And the second way to look at it is he has three families. One he had to leave behind and destroy, and that's Mitzrayim. But Midian, maybe he doesn't have to let go. Maybe they can join. Maybe they could be part. And if I want to even look at the Midrash in source 48, which tells me that Yitro was one of the advisors of Paro who said not to hurt the Jewish people, maybe I can see in him the Midrash of Rashi. He was a Kohen LaHashem. This is someone who did take on the values of the Jewish people. This is someone who did. So Moshe sitting there there and going, please stay. And at first he says, lo elech. But then if the point is he stays at the end, he changes his mind. He's more like Rus, who says, I'm going to join your nation. Or he's like Rivka, who leaves behind her family to join up with Yitzchak, or Rachel and Leah, who leaves behind their family to join up with Yaakov back to Israel. The Alshach just points out, if you go home, Moshe saying to Yitro, like Orpah goes home, you're going back to your God. You're going back to your ways. The only way to stay with our values is to come with. And therefore, it is possible to argue that in this story, this person, whether it's Yitro or Chovav, he says, you know what? At the end, we don't hear it because it's not on the pasuk. I'm going to stay. And maybe this is the final piece of the relationship of Moshe and Yitro, where they come together in their beliefs, and Yitro joins Moshe. Or maybe Yitro is already long gone, but it's Moshe joining together with his brother-in-law, from his brother-in-law to join him. Maybe like Yonatan, who joins together with his brother-in-law, David, and they love each other. Moshe and Chovav, maybe this is his brother-in-law, which he loves. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, we just don't know. We don't know if this is the story of the person leaving or the person staying with Moshe. We don't know if this is Yitro. We don't know if this is Chovav. So to some extent, since there's so many things we don't know, you have to ask, what am I supposed to learn from this story? And if I look at the story once again, I see the message and I see the key to relationships with in-laws, and I see the key to relationships with all people that we have difficulty with. You see, Moshe's turning to someone, I don't know who this person is, and he's saying, come on, come with us. We're going somewhere. Come with us. And the guy says no. And Moshe says, no, it'll be good for you. Please come with us. And Ramban even points out, he was saying, even though he was pretending, oh, you'll be our eyes, you'll help us. We didn't need his help. We had God. We had the Anan. He was saying, don't worry, it'll be good for you. You'll get land in Eretz Yisrael. Everything will be good. What was Moshe trying to do here? He was trying to say to whoever this is, this family member of his, come with. And you have to understand at this moment in time, Moshe is about to lead the Jewish people into Eretz Yisrael. At least that's what he thought, until the Mitzonanim and all the problems occur. This is the hugest moment of his life. It's the time where we normally give excuses to people who you forget. When you have big moments in your life, you just forget to invite other people in because you're so in your own mind and you're so in your own picture. And Moshe stops. Now, Simanachnu, Baitanu. He stops and he says to this relative who's not part of us, who is thinking to go home, and he says, come with. And whether he comes with or not is irrelevant, because the message of the story is Nosim anachnu ba'itanu. That's the message, to turn to people who are on the outside, to turn to people that you're struggling with and say to them, please come with us. Be part of our world. Be part of my family. Be part of my journey. Be part of my life. I think when you think about it in terms of Moshe, who had these three families, why do we always joke about in-laws? We joke about in-laws because they are a different family than us. They have different practices, different customs, different behaviors, different lifestyles, and you're taking two families and you're joining them together. And that causes conflict, because anytime that you take people who are just different and you put them together, it causes conflict. Moshe had three. Could you imagine how confusing that was for him? And therefore, here he is with a very specific lifestyle, with all these rules. He's getting the Torah and everyone has to follow, and he has all these ways, and his father-in-law is getting involved and telling him what to do. And I don't know, maybe it's the brother-in-law. Who knows who this is? And he says, and he stops and he says, come with, be part. And that to me is the message. The reason why we struggle in relationships, whether it's in-law relationship, friendship relationships, family relationships, is because we close doors on people. We shut people out. And it might be by accident. It might be on purpose. We don't invite people so they get insulted, or we make them feel bad like they don't belong. And that's where relationship issues are. It's because we make people feel like they're the outsider. They're not part of our family. They're not part of our lives. And Moshe is saying the key to relationships is nosim anachnu ba'itanu. Invite them into our lives, either physically, inviting them really, or even emotionally, trying to understand them, trying to make them part of your life, make them part of who you are. That's how you have good relationships with all types of people. And I think this is such a powerful message, again, about in-laws, how to fix all relationships, how to fix any relationship that is difficult. Stop ourselves and say, did we invite this person in? Did we really allow them into our hearts? Did we really accept them for who they are? Did we say to them like Moshe Rabbeinu did, Nosim anachnu ba'itanu? And I think if we take a step back right now, it's the time of COVID, and I think it has changed our perspective, because there are so many times that we have difficult relationships with people, and we say, you know what, we have time to work on it. We have time to invite these people in. And then all of a sudden we have a time in our lives, you can't invite anyone into your own home. It's unbelievable. And people died that we never expected to die. And we're like, what's going on? We thought we had time. And all of a sudden we realize we may not have the time that we thought we had with people. So here's our time, and here's our opportunity to say, when we have difficulties and we have difficult relationships, let's learn from Moshe Rabbeinu. Let's learn from him and how he dealt with, again, I don't know if it's the brother-in-law, the father-in-law, I don't know. But he says to them, Nosim anachnu ba'itanu, come with, be part of my life, please. And again, whether they come or not, we don't know the ending of the story, but it's the message to us that before we move on in our lives, to make sure that all the people that we want there with us are invited into our hearts, invited into our homes, that we make sure that we allow all of our relatives, including our in-laws, including our friends, and all of our family to be part of our lives. So let's all learn from Moshe. Nosim anachnu ba'itanu. Thank you, all of you, for learning with me tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I wish you all a very good night.